Welcome back again to the Fedrick's lens. Before a diagram is understood, it is often felt. A circle can feel complete before anyone explains it. A balanced arrangement can feel trustworthy before its logic is followed. A layered structure can suggest order before the mind can name exactly why. That is where this part of the story begins. Because once the heavens became something that could be interpreted, preserved, and taught, another pressure appeared. Knowledge needed form. Not only spoken form. Not only memory. Not only instrument. Visible form. Something the eye could return to. Something the teacher could point to. Something the student could revisit. Something a civilization could preserve even when the original observer was gone. That is where the cosmos became a diagram. And that shift matters more than most people realize. Because a diagram is never just a neutral illustration. It is a way of turning complexity into something that looks inhabitable. That is its power. The heavens are vast, too large to hold in one glance, too dynamic to preserve in memory alone, too immense to teach effectively without structure. A diagram solves that problem by compressing. It takes a reality that unfolds across time, motion, and scale, and gives it a visible body. That is what makes diagrammatic form so powerful in civilization. It lets order survive encounter. Instead of vanishing with the night, the pattern can remain. Instead of being held only in the memory of a specialist, it can be laid out in a visible system. Instead of requiring total direct observation every time, it can be re-entered through a surface. That is one of the deepest shifts in the whole story. Because once cosmic order becomes visible in structured form, it becomes easier not only to preserve, but to trust. That is the hidden force of diagrams. They do not just display knowledge. They stage knowledge as coherence. And coherence has extraordinary persuasive force. This is why the circle matters so much. The circle does not only organize information efficiently. It resonates. It echoes recurrence, return, enclosure, wholeness, the impression of a system that comes back upon itself without obvious rupture. That is why circular cosmological forms feel so powerful. They do not merely represent order. They perform it. The eye sees a circle and receives a signal before the intellect catches up. This belongs together. That is not a minor effect. It is one of the oldest forms of visual persuasion. And once that force begins attaching itself to the structure of the cosmos, diagrams stop being simple aids. They begin becoming legitimacy devices. That phrase matters, because legitimacy is not sustained only by accuracy. It is also sustained by form. A system that looks ordered is easier to trust than one that appears chaotic. A visual arrangement that feels balanced is easier to inhabit than one that feels fragmented. A diagram that gathers movement, relation, and position into a clean structure begins communicating before anyone explains it in words. That is where visual doctrine begins. Not doctrine in the narrow religious sense. Doctrine in the deeper sense of a visible order system that teaches the viewer how reality is supposed to be seen. That is what a strong diagram does. It does not only answer questions. It teaches the eye what kind of world it is looking at. And once the eye has been taught, the mind often follows more easily. This is why form matters so much in the history of knowledge. Because human beings do not only learn through statements. They learn through arrangement, through relation, through emphasis, through proximity, through repetition of shape, through the feeling that parts belong inside a larger whole. A diagram delivers all of that at once. That is why it is such a powerful compression technology. A sky event may take hours, days, or seasons to become legible in direct experience. A diagram can condense that into one visible relation. Not perfectly, not totally, but powerfully enough to guide understanding. That is a huge civilizational advantage. Because once complexity can be compressed into a surface, it becomes easier to copy, preserve, teach, reference, standardize, and build upon. This is where diagrams begin extending the power of interpreters. In the previous part of the story, authority gathered around people trusted to explain celestial order. Now that authority gains visible support, a teacher can speak, a custodian can preserve, but a diagram can stabilize. It can hold the structure in front of others. It can make the system appear repeatable and self-consistent. That is why diagrams are not secondary to knowledge. They become part of how knowledge gains durability. This is also why they have such unusual force across time. People often underestimate how much of belief readiness begins in the eye. But the eye is constantly making judgments. Does this cohere? Does this feel complete? Does this look disciplined? Does this seem ordered enough to trust? A diagram answers those questions almost instantly. Not completely, but enough to prepare the mind. That is why a well-ordered surface can feel persuasive before full comprehension arrives. The diagram creates readiness. And readiness matters. Because the more a person feels that a system fits together, the easier it becomes to accept, learn, and use. This does not mean all diagrams are manipulative in some crude sense. It means form itself has epistemic power. Visible structure changes how truth feels. That is the major insight here. And once you see that, the diagram stops looking like a passive image. It becomes an active participant in the creation of trust. The cosmos is now no longer only overhead, no longer only remembered, no longer only explained through trained voices. It now appears on a surface in a way that can be revisited. This is a huge shift, because what can be revisited can begin shaping a civilization more deeply. A child can inherit it. A student can practice with it. A teacher can return to it. A system can repeat through it. This is where form becomes continuity. And continuity is what gives civilization depth. A pattern glimpsed once is fragile. A pattern placed into durable visible form becomes harder to lose. That is why diagrams matter so much in the long run. They let knowledge survive the disappearance of the moment that first revealed it. This is especially important with something like the heavens. The sky is real, recurring, and vast. But human access to it is always partial. No one sees all its meaningful relations at once. No one carries the entire field in immediate awareness. A diagram helps solve that problem by making the invisible relation between moments more visible in a single frame. That is what compression does. It gives simultaneity to what direct experience encounters only in sequence. And once sequence becomes visible as a whole, it begins to feel graspable. That is why diagrams are so powerful in every age. They give the mind a way to inhabit relations too large to hold directly. And once a civilization begins trusting diagrams, it enters a new stage of mediated reality. Not false reality. Mediated reality. Reality approached through forms that make it easier to read. That is another threshold in the larger series. Because the deeper pattern is becoming clearer now. First, the heavens are noticed. Then their recurrence is trusted. Then pattern becomes number and geometry. Then order is built into tools. Then interpreters arise around that knowledge. And now, that knowledge becomes visible doctrine through form. That is a major civilizational staircase. And the diagram sits at the center of it as one of the most underappreciated steps. Because once a system can be seen as ordered, it becomes easier to preserve it and easier to act through it. That is why the next shift becomes possible. If order can be stabilized in visible form, then it no longer has to stay fixed only in public spaces, manuscripts, or teaching contexts. It can begin to travel. It can become portable. And that is where the relationship between human beings and the cosmos changes again. Because once a model of order can be carried, consulted, and used personally, the heavens are no longer only structured. They become hand-scale. That is where the next part of the story begins. If this video made you see the world a little differently, go ahead and smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Let me know down below what should I cover next. I appreciate you all so much. Catch you in the next video. Look closer, see further, decide for yourself.